Even today, people on the news are freaking out. And I gotta say, like, this is my favorite entertainment now, to see journalists in business suits freaking out, sparking out at the camera, showing how concerned they are. And the reason it's entertaining is because I know they're reading talking points. I do speak with some journalists behind the scenes, and they have completely different opinions than the ones that they share on air. But in front of the public, they're outraged. It's almost like the United States is fucking with their own mother, you know? Like, that's the level of outrage that they're having over foreign affairs that really... I mean, they do implicate Romania, but not at the level of outrage that they're displaying. So, what the journalists, and by the journalists I mean the cultural zeitgeist, fails to understand in all of this, is that Trump is not negotiating peace for Europe or for Russia or for Ukraine. Like, no, Trump is negotiating peace for America. Like, that's what he is doing. He is negotiating peace for the United States in the United States' interests. And this used to be the norm, like 30 or 40 years ago, that every single nation would look out for its own personal interests first and foremost, because that's just the natural order of things. A nation state functions by having its citizens pay taxes to hire politicians to represent them, the taxpayer. Right? Like, just like a company, the people that invest in the company require the company to look out for their interests. It's how the world works. But recently, we have a new way of thinking. We have a new status quo, which is, some people call it neoliberalism, other people call it pink capitalism, other people call it woke. Here in Europe, it's called Sorosism, right? Like George Soros, Sorosism. And this new way of thinking is that the citizen pays taxes, and then the politician takes that money in order to use it for its own benefits, in order to use it for its own personal interests, for its own personal clicks, to launder it through NGOs that then comes back to the politician and his friends. And so, like, this way of thinking has lowered the lifestyle of many people through ideologies like environmentalism, through incompetence, by stacking all of corporations and all of the institutions with ESG until Delta planes fall out from the sky. And so, like, people have had enough, especially in the United States, because in the United States, the democratic process is a lot more impactful than here in Europe. Like, here in Europe, even if you were to vote consistently far-right parties, they would have to be voted throughout Europe. And even then, is the European Commission that holds all the power. So, like, change is extremely difficult to happen in the old continent. But in America, it happened quite fast. And so, we notice a major change in thinking. And the Americans are declaring war on the woke. Like, this is what I think the Trump administration is doing. Its main purpose is to declare full-out war on the culture of woke. Like, it's a huge cultural shift. The same way that Obama and Joe Biden also declared war on conservative thinking. For instance, the abolition of the concept of gender by pressuring the private companies to stop promoting what they would consider to be harmful gender stereotypes, by forcing companies to have HR, and by forcing diversity, inclusivity, and equity on every single level, right? It wasn't like just like passing legislation, but it was trying to push for a cultural change to make people believe that environmentalism is a good policy. By forcing social media, like if I now start talking about environmental issues, I get a disclaimer on YouTube to say like, no, this guy is full of shit. Look at Wikipedia. Look at that. The global warming is man-made, right? Like, all of this war on conservatism happened back in the Obama era and then in the Joe Biden era. And now Trump is trying to undo it. Like, he's trying to unfuck all of the policies that were back. And so, like, when you view it as a cultural war, not just a political change in the presidency, but like a complete shift in the way of thinking that's not coming from Trump. It's not like one day Trump woke up and he said, I have enough of wokeness. No, it's coming from from the grassroots. Like, the American people have had enough. The American people notice that their lifestyle has gone down, that crime is higher, that food is more expensive, that their country is involved in a lot of wars that they didn't consent to. Regardless how you feel about the war, like, the American people were never polled regarding the Ukrainian conflict, right? And so they had enough, and they're like rebelling against this cultural thing by electing anyone that's willing to represent them. And in this situation, it just happened to be Trump. But if it wasn't Trump, it would have been someone else. And so once you understand that way of thinking, you understand that when Trump went to negotiate the end of the conflict for Ukraine, he's not negotiating on anyone else besides in America's interests. Like, that's the only thing he cares about. He doesn't care about Europe. He doesn't care about Russia. He doesn't care about what the Democrats think. His only interest, like, what is good for the United States. And apparently he considers, and this is my assessment of the situation, that Trump views China and Asia to be much more of strategical importance right now than Europe. And he wants to withdraw from Europe. That's my understanding. Why? Because he thinks Europe is woke. And more importantly, it's hostile to his administration. I mean, how can you blame him? You have a European commissioner wanting Elon Musk arrested because he had an interview with Donald Trump. Do you guys remember that? Like, do you think that wouldn't have any consequence? Do you guys remember the first time Trump was in office and he was constantly attacked by Germany, Britain, all these European nations that are America's allies were directly attacking his administration? Do you think there wouldn't be consequences for doing that? Well, apparently he's reminding Europeans of their place. Like, okay, well, your manufacturing is inferior to ours. Your economic growth is inferior to ours. You rely on our military. You beg for our military because now you're freaking out if we're pulling out. You use our internet and social media. And you're acting like you're better than us. You're acting like you know better than the Americans. And so, like, maybe it's time to remind you of your place. You guys have fucked yourselves because of your own bureaucracy and incompetence. You have absolutely no strong leader to negotiate with me. And that's what really pisses me off, by the way. Because all I see from Europe is moralizing Donald Trump. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm not an American citizen. I can't vote for whom's going to be in America. And if you're saying that our whole world relies on the fact that Americans need to vote in European Union's interests, well, you're fucked in the head with that policy. Because sure, now you have Trump and you don't like it. You know what? Maybe he's insane or whatever. He's a dictator, he's a fascist, blah, 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 whatever nonsense the journalists are saying. What about in 20 years from now, though? What about in 30 years? Like, you're saying that our entire way of life hinges on the Americans to not vote Trump in perpetuity. And you have no backup plan. You have, like, are you insane? Like, that's not how you run a country. I'm sorry, that's insanity. Like, no, Europe needs to be strong by itself. And it needs to be strong by creating a powerful manufacturing industry, creating powerful AI technology, having allies. It's like, okay, you don't like China. You don't like Russia. Now you don't like America either. What the fuck do you like? Well, pick someone. Pick someone. No one is perfect. Hey, fucking pick someone and stick with them. Have them as your allies. Don't like America? Ally with China. Don't like Russia? Ally with America, but like ally with someone because you don't have a fucking military, and that's a good thing, by the way. I wouldn't want Europe to have a military. I think like that would be horrible. That's how you get another world war. The previous two started from Europe. Why the fuck would I want to experience and fuck around and find out? I actually like the status quo with NATO. Even if NATO has its own problems and some people accuse it of corruption, okay. But at the end of the day, things are peaceful. And so when you understand that, it's like Trump is negotiating on behalf of the United States, well, everything else makes sense, right? Like, why the fuck would he want Europe? Like, if Europe comes at the negotiation table, they're just annoying. They're not going to negotiate in the U.S. Interest, and, you know, why should the U.S. allow for that to happen? Again, they have no say in it because they can't put tariffs on the U.S. They can't threaten the U.S. militarily. They can't even influence the peace treaty. It's like, okay, well, if America says we're not going to support Ukraine, so we're not going to give any munitions, any troops, anything else, any information, you're on your own. Well, up until now, you had America and Europe funding Ukraine. If America leaves, can Europe continue the funding by itself? I don't think so. And so, they have absolutely nothing to negotiate with. And so they're not going to be invited because the new way of doing things, it's like every country is for its own interests. America was smart to elect someone that represents its interests. Europe doesn't have anyone that represents our interests and is a powerful statesman and knows. And they couldn't even debunk the J.D. Vance speech. That's how incompetent they are. So, let's see what America gained from the conflict in Ukraine. Well, from what I can gather, America didn't actually want to fight the Russians. If you actually look at the buildup, they were preparing to fight the Chinese. Because in Asia, the situation with Taiwan is getting a little bit dicey. China is constantly amping up the tension. And so, like, America was pulling out from the Middle East. That's what we noticed with the Afghanistan withdrawal and with all of that. They were actually repurposing most of their military to have a conflict on the sea, and especially to have a conflict in Asia, in the case something happens. Like, they weren't actually trying to invade or anything, but you got, in times of peace, prepare for war, as they say. So, like, they were preparing there. And then Russia does the mistake and invades Ukraine. Now, from America's point of view, China is a problem, and the Russian-Chinese alliance would be a huge problem. It would be an immense problem for them. And so what they did is like, okay, well, let's keep the Russians bogged down there. Let's keep them fighting there, because then they can't fight in other places. And we noticed that the strategy actually worked because the Bashar al-Assad regime fell in Syria. So when shit went down in Syria, the Russians couldn't get in to help. And they lost a friendly regime over there. The Russians also lost economically more than the Americans, right? Like, if you look at the number of dollars that the Americans pumped into Ukraine versus the number of rubles that the Russians pumped into Ukraine, you'll notice a huge difference. You'll notice that the Russian economy is affected, like it's destabilized due to the conflict. A lot of young Russian people and a lot of young Russian soldiers have died. Like, they may have lost a significant chunk of the population, not just through the attrition of war, but like people actually fleeing Russia. A lot of rich people fled Russia not to be drafted in the conflict. And then it also lost in its objectives. Like, if it wanted NATO to stay away from its borders, the NATO border actually expanded. By forcing the Europeans to buy gas from the Americans and not from Russians, America yet again won. And now it seems that it wants the possibility to exploit the rare earth minerals from Ukraine, which is something that America is struggling to get because the Chinese can always put an embargo, and they already placed an embargo for certain rare earth minerals towards the Americans, and now they can get it from someplace else. So overwhelmingly, like, the Americans are really happy with this deal. Like, they have no reason not to. Again, like, the purpose of the war, and this is how I view it, it wasn't to get Ukraine to win, but at the same time, it was also not to allow Russia to win. It was to keep it as a forever war, as long as possible, to keep Russia bogged down, and to cause as much attrition to the Russians as humanly possible. And I think, like, the new administration, the Trump administration, disagrees with this solution. I don't know why. Maybe they're viewing the situation in Asia becoming more tense. Maybe they're afraid that them as Americans will be caught on three fronts, because you have, like, the front in Ukraine, you have the front in the Middle East, and now if something happens with China, you'd have another front, and a Russian-Chinese alliance is the thing that they don't like. And so, maybe for whatever reason, they don't want the conflict to keep going. And they're saying, all right, well, we gained enough from this. Let's wrap it up. Let's pull our forces from the region and let's focus on Asia. And so if this is the situation, the Ukrainians get shafted a little bit, but it could have been much worse for them. I mean, if they lose 20% of their territory, that's still better than losing 100%, because without American help, chances are the Russians would have taken over Kiev. But the ones that get fucked the most are the Europeans. And the reason that we're getting fucked It's because we're weak. And weakness invites aggression. And weakness doesn't necessarily mean that we lack military might, because you can be strong in other means. You can, for example, be like Israel. Like, Israel doesn't have an army that can dominate the entire planet, but they're strong financially, they're strong politically, they have connections. Europe used to have connections, but with the Democrats. They have no connections with the Republicans. And so now that it's a Republican establishment, well, we're getting fucked. And we're also getting fucked because, okay, you may not have the political connections, right? You may not have the know-how on how to make friends in high places. But you don't have a manufacturing industry. You don't have a strong economy. If this shit happened 30 years ago, there is no way that America would have been able to bypass Europe in an European conflict. Because all Europe would have to do is like, oh, okay, you're bypassing us, well, we're going to start dealing with the Chinese from now on. Get fucked. But we can't do that, right? And so, because we don't like the Chinese, and we do like the American money. And so you have America, closing a blind eye when a Germany pipeline gets blown up. You have all of this problem caused by environmentalism, which destroyed our industry sector. You have all this problem that comes from bureaucracy. Like, every single year, there's just tens of thousands of regulations coming from the European Union. And the question is, like, when will it end? Like, how much can you regulate until people don't even have free will anymore? Like, you're going to have to start a business, and everything is like set up for you on how to do it, and you have no room for innovation, you have no room for experimentation with other things, because like everything is regulated by the government. And so all of our entrepreneurs, all of our Elon Muskses, they fuck off to America or they fuck off to China. Hell, they may even fuck off to Russia in the future if this keeps up. It's insane, right? So like, instead of having some reflection, some self-reflection, it's like, oh, what are we doing with Europe? Like, look how we're getting bypassed on important events. They're just nagging at Trump. It's like, you're not married with the man. You're not his wife. You don't have big tits in order to influence him with nagging. You can nag and he will tell you to fuck off. Oh, but we're the strategic partners. Okay, what if the United States becomes a strategic partner with Russia? What do you do then? And chances are, from what I've listened to this particular meeting, it seems that the United States wants Russia as a partner. I was a little bit baffled. I don't know, maybe I misinterpreted the meeting that took place in Saudi Arabia, but the main point of discussion wasn't the ending of conflict in Ukraine. Like, that was one point. But from my understanding, the main point was the normalization of relations between the United States and Russia. So we're probably going to see Visa and MasterCard returning to Russia. We're going to see American companies returning to Russia. We're going to see U.S. oil companies resuming their work with Gazprom. We're going to see the sanctions and the restrictions lifted. We're going to see Russians back on Twitch. Demonetized Russian channels coming back on YouTube. And the European Union, oh, well, what about your allies? What about your allies? Well, apparently, the Americans right now consider that Russia has something to offer. And unlike the European Union, they're not nagging at Trump. They're not calling Trump a fascist and a dictator, right? This is the thing that I don't get. Like, look at it from a real-life perspective. If you want to do business with a person, if you want to have a person on your good side, do you insult them? Do you gossip behind their back? Do you attack them constantly in the media? No. If you want someone to actually be a partner, you talk nice about them. And you're being polite. Well, Europe is constantly just spurging out, Trump this, Trump that. Trump is the will of the people. He is the sitting incumbent president of the United States. When you talk shit about him, you're talking shit about Americans. And they did that during the first presidency. And I said, like, this is going to have consequences. And now it does. Well, hopefully, this is a wake-up call for Europe. And hopefully, we're going to actually start electing strong leaders in order to navigate the turbulent time that's coming and understand that wokeness as an ideology is not sustainable. The rest of the world doesn't share it. And if you keep sharing it, it's actually going to lead to more collapse. China is not woke, Russia is not woke, and it seems that America is going to stop being woke. But Europe wants to double down. Okay. Let me know what you guys think. And as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.